So yes, very good evening to all the participants who have joined, ladies and gentlemen, students, faculties. I take this proud privilege to welcome you all to, I would say, yet another enlightening session on uh, the crux that we always talk about, which is entrepreneurship. And today I have my good friend from Finland, Professor Lasse Torkeli, who is an expert on international growth of small and medium-sized enterprises, who is also the associate professor at LAT Business School, adjunct professor at international business at Turku School of Economics. I approached Professor Lasse a month ago, and yes, he was, I was immensely I would say honored and proud with this profile, which absolutely talks about the crux of our program as well. And we were glad that he was able to accept the invitation, and today it's all happening here. Professor Lassi, we are an institute belonging to South India, GIBS, Global Institute of Business Studies. We run two programs with us, the postgraduate program, PGDM, and the undergraduate program, which is a 3 years program, which is called BBA, the Bachelor of Business Administrations. I have over 900 students with me, spread over all states of India, I would say, from the north part to the south part, students from all of the states. And IRE is one of the flagship program that I would say. IRE stands for Innovation, Research, and Entrepreneurship, where, generally, typically a business school always nurtures leaders for tomorrow. Either they make them the managers or they make them the entrepreneurs. So I'm very happy to say that, a lot of my students have expressed their interest or happiness to get into this, the startup ecosystem. The place that we belong to, Bangalore, is, I would say Silicon Valley of India. There's n number of startups coming up on a very daily basis, right? So I think, yeah, I mean, the economy is treating well. The Indian economy is now treating very well. It has given the red carpet entry to all these budding entrepreneurs. So I think as a business school, it's our moral responsibility to inculcate those entrepreneurial skill sets in the students. And through IRE, we were able to get some world-class entrepreneurs, world-class faculties who have shared their insights with them. So you are one among them. I'm so happy that you have accepted our invitation. On behalf of all the students gathered here, I extend my heartfelt welcome to you, Professor Lassi.
Thank you, Professor, and I'm glad to be here. So we discussed that I would first have a kind of formal presentation in a way, kind of not directly necessarily a lecture, but go through some of my experiences in terms of these topics, and then we'll try to leave a time towards the end of the session, so as much for the discussion as possible. And the other point that I was thinking about for this session was that I try to avoid talking about the general theories that you all can just pick up any course book and read, and to provide added value based on my personal experience and
that's more
family issues that we have.
That's more important. See, as you rightly said, these discussions are always done inside the four walls of the classroom. And we make use of such, platforms to hear the real life experiences. And that's the exact point that you have quoted. We're all eager and excited. Over to you, Professor Lassi.
Thank you. So let me share the screen. I like to joke sometimes because I'm from LUT, which is the University of Technology. So that is common about the universities, that oftentimes we have issues with technology when we're doing. So let's see if it works this time. To share the screen. So you should now see all the first slide, correct?
Right.
You don't? Yes. Wonderful. So welcome to the session. Entrepreneurship in a Connected World, Strategies for Navigating the Global Economy. My name is Lasse Torkeli, and here is a picture of our campus where I work. This is in southeastern Finland, and it actually doesn't quite look like so nice right now because it's midwinter here in Finland, so it's actually quite raining and icy and dark. But this is how it looks in 6 months from now. And a couple of words very briefly about myself and the university, and then we get into two of the main topics that I was thinking about when developing this talk for today. So here is, in the next slide is just a brief word cloud. So I put all of my publications in a word cloud generator and come up with a picture. So that this captures what I have been doing for the past 10 or 15 years or so in terms of teaching, publishing, project work, and working with the businesses in the area in general. So international business, and especially the SMEs, there's a practical reason why I'm looking into the small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. Finland as an economy is highly SME-based. So if we look at SME is a company that employs less than 250 people. That's a general definition. And here in Finland, most of the companies actually are less than 50 people, even in that category. So we have a couple of exceptions. Some of those large multinationals that you may have heard of, like Nokia and a couple of others, but you can basically count them by two hands. So there are not many. So 99% of the companies are actually SMEs. And then when we talk about growth orientation, that the entrepreneurs and the companies that do want to grow their business. Well, Finland is logistically it's not the hub of the world in terms of geography. And also it's a very small, open domestic market. So if you are a growth-oriented company, then by definition, we are talking about internationalization and international business very early on in the company's growth trajectory. And another aspect that is highly contextual in Finland, although I'm sure it's also true in many other countries, is that of the Finnish companies, about 95% are family-owned businesses and SMEs. And if you think about in terms of how that impacts international business contextually, then of course if you think it for yourself, so if you're running a company that is owned and run by your family, you may be less inclined to take the necessary risk that internationalization always benefits because you're in a way then playing with your family legacy. So these type of companies tend to be very risk averse in terms of taking those risks necessary for internationalization. And the other aspect would be that even those companies who would be seen as interesting for venture capitalists, angel investors, the different kind of private investment, research that we've done indicates that the finances are an issue because the family-owned businesses, they don't want to dilute their ownership unless they absolutely have to. So rather than take on private investment to realize their international business ambitions and strategizing towards that perspective, what they actually do is they take a more long-term, gradual, slow approach, and they try to secure their financing through banks, which of course are high on collateral, and they are not very friendly in terms of these high-growth, high-tech startup investment, for instance, in that perspective. So by definition, if you are researching business and international business in Finland, you have to be able to say something about SMEs. And of course, also that's where much of the public interest lies. That's where a lot of the taxation issues lie and so on and so on. So by studying internationalization of SMEs, that has been my gateway to the international business world in general. And then, of course, over time, this has developed towards more. Currently, I'm interested in different aspects of researching. So I'm always been looking at what determines successful internationalization of firms. So successful strategizing of companies. So not just talking about the theories, but trying to find the determinants that actually enable small firms that tend to be resource constrained by nature to be able to realize their international ambitions. Then another aspect that relates to also to education is that what would be the best international entrepreneur policy in terms of not just supporting in terms of export promotion to companies, but also how should we educate people so that they could become the best possible international business scholars and practitioners and business people that they can. And then thirdly, I'm looking into replication and generalization work. So in terms of the sciences in general, there has been a bit of a replication crisis in recent years in that what we have found to be the case also in business and international business in many cases seems that it's not easy to replicate. So if I find something in the Finnish context, then I would claim that, okay, you could then take this in the Southeastern Asian context, for instance, and apply the same kind of principles and this should work out. But then actually what research has been showing that it's highly contextual and the question is that if we have some insights in terms of what international strategizing should be about and what is the effective way of making an internationalization strategy and international growth strategy, how specific is that to your company or your area, your specific country, and to what extent can we actually make generalizable recommendations based on our scientific work. So these in brief are the current aspects. Then I'm not sure, some of you may be more or less familiar with Finland, but here are just 4 pictures that starting from the left side of the screen, we start with the Finland's place in the world in general. So it's a 5.5 million people, so very sparsely populated country. Then if you look at the second picture, this is a highly timely picture where Finland is located in terms of Europe. So you may have noticed that there's a big border with Russia. And then if you look at the third picture, this is the area where Lappeenranta, where I'm currently residing, and where LUT University had its original campus and still some of the main businesses. So they are specifically, we are about 40 kilometers from the Russian border. And I'm sure, as you may have heard, there's a bit of things going on in Europe and in Ukraine in terms of the Russian involvement. So happy and not so happy at the same time to say that it's very quiet around here. So in a quiet in the sense that even though Finland has about 1,300 kilometers of shared border with Russia, there hasn't been any conflicts, but also it's bad for business. So we talk about international business in terms of inward internationalization, in other words, tourism. So this has been a big boon in our area for decades now. But now, of course, the border is closed. So this is very quiet and businesses are not thriving at all. And in terms of any businesses that did have international business engagement in the Russian area, so we could look at, for instance, St. Petersburg and say that geographically that is closer to where I'm sitting than Helsinki. So it has been a very nice hub, this Lappeenranta area, for many years. But now the situation is very different. How it relates to international business is actually quite interesting. So today I will mainly focus on my talk two timely areas that relate to international business. One is what can we say now that hopefully the coronavirus pandemic is mostly behind us in many ways, although it's still ongoing in different bases. But the initial shock has been presided, so we know something about it from research perspective. And the other would be the rise of generative AI and how that seems to be impacting international business. In terms of the third aspect that I might have talked about is the geopolitical tensions and the kind of the decline or the expected challenges in terms of globalization that are now arising with regionalization. So, of course, as you know, the war in Ukraine started about 3 years ago. That's exactly the day when nobody in Finland was interested in talking about the pandemic anymore, and everybody started talking about the Ukraine war. And what was interesting was that there was some of the first people who raised these concerns were not just the military people saying that, okay, we need to prepare and we need to think about the strategic alliances and military alliances now, because Finland for many decades used to be, although in European Union, so Western market, but militarily non-aligned. But the international business scholars actually raised a big issue right as the war started 3 years ago, namely that the country risk for Finland just went sky high in one day. To say that if your multinational company was thinking about investments and foreign direct investment in different companies, suddenly Finland, whereas it had been seen as an institutionally stable country, where the ease of doing business is relatively low or relatively good in terms of any additional hurdles or corruption and such, and where actually, for instance, the price of electricity has been relatively low. So any kind of business such as data centers that are heavy on electric use, then of course those companies generally tended to, for many years and decades, tended to see Finland as a potentially attractive FDI target. But now suddenly Finland became a huge risk in terms of being the only country in Western Europe that has a large border with Russia, but was not aligned. So this also necessitated very quickly that the mood changed. And now that Finland has joined the NATO alliance, so it's no longer neutral in terms of being in the whims of Russian politics. Now we are actually seeing FDI pick up very quickly, and we see actually quite large investments. So this is news from a couple of months ago. So this is late November, where Google has had its data centers. One of the main ones has been in Hamina, which is very near where I live. It's next to the Russian border. And actually, Google and some other companies are investing in Finland quite heavily. So in many ways, actually, if you think about geopolitical tensions and international business, they are very much interlinked in terms of the internationalization strategy. the risk factors, especially when you're making those international business decisions. So this would be the point. Then just a couple of points about our university. So LUT, Finnish university, is a middle-sized in terms of Finnish universities, not that big. So we have campuses in Lappeenranta and also in Lahti, which is a little bit nearer to Helsinki. So founded in 1969, so one of the newest universities in Finland. The business school was founded in the 90s. We have about 8,000 bachelor's and master's students in total. And then, of course, one aspect that characterized the Finnish universities is specialization. So here is just listed some of the areas where we teach. So we have both the technical school and then the business school is separately. And with the technical side, we have topics such as chemical engineering and software engineering, computation, and so on. So in terms of the Finnish universities, we are able to actually focus on business and the interlinkages of business and technology, that is to say high technology entrepreneurship, which by definition is highly internationally oriented, which is growth ambitions and then scalability and so on. So this is perhaps why I find myself, part of why I find myself talking here today. And then, of course, there are some rankings, which there are all kinds of rankings with the universities in the world. Why they are important in the Finnish universities is that we have a mixture of public and private funding. And in a way, the Finnish universities are competing with each other in terms of the government funding as well. And one important tool there is this global rankings. And so we are, even though we're a small organization and rather recent one in terms of the business school, we are doing quite well in terms of the scientific output. Then before we get into the main topics, maybe this would be a time if anyone has any questions or comments. So I think Rohini at least has had a hand up for some time. So if you want to pitch in, I think now would be a good time to have a bit of an interjection.
Yes, there are a few, but I think we would complete it and then take it up. Does that okay?
All right, let's do so.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned, the two topics that I would be specifying, going in specific for today would be about the lessons that we can now draw, and we are actually drawing in terms of scientific research from navigating the global economy and also personal experience in working with the local companies in Finland, many of them that were international. The second aspect would be the generative AI. Now, of course, by necessity, I'm always focusing on specific cases because the topics themselves are quite large and it could be maybe validate the entire course each in terms of if you really want to get into depth, but some food for thought. One aspect that we find in terms of international business that the pandemic has brought and how it impacted was that the impact of resilience in international business was highly tested, and the companies, especially that were able to exhibit resilience in terms of their finances, in terms of their organizational structure, in terms of their digitalization across the value chain, were the type of companies that were able to drive. And I think from that perspective, it was not perhaps a secret or a surprise in a way that it was especially the large manufacturing multinationals that were oftentimes struggling with these supply chain issues and these issues with the different aspects. And the other aspect that I found, we found in our research, especially in Finland, was that it was actually quite a interesting case with that. It was the companies that were actually engaging in international business that were able to exhibit that agility, because the COVID pandemic, like many other global phenomena, are something where if your company is operating in different countries, then you are able to strategize your business decisions based on the evolving situation in different countries. And in this case also, it was some of the largest hit companies in Finland were the companies that were not doing international business, regardless of whether or not they were service or manufacturing companies. Of course, you could think about the hospitality industry and these different kind of industries that were relying on face-to-face interaction that were very, very specifically hit from that perspective. But of course, the pandemic itself was not just the only thing that was going on, but the increase in protectionism, regionalization, and what is oftentimes called increasing multipolarization of the world. And I wouldn't say the failure, but the challenge is related to the globalization and the previous assumption that the globalization is a process that will just go on, and the country's specific barriers in terms of doing business will be continuing to be broken down and so on. I think that the pandemic itself was not really something that caused it, but definitely accentuated in terms of not just international travel, but in terms of actually how you're doing business, and how you actually are making decisions related to borders in terms of business based on the internal politics within the country. So, for instance, in Finland during the COVID times, there were some measures taken that hasn't been taken since the World War II. So, such as quarantining entire regions so that people in the Helsinki area could not live anywhere for about 2 weeks. So, of course, these aspects very much have an impact of any company that is not highly domestically focused, but rather has a global orientation or international orientation. And then, of course, the other aspect would be that these external shocks, such as the pandemic, also provide opportunities for resilient entrepreneurs to innovate their business models. Now, there's a bit of an irony in this, in that in the scholarly world, there's rather ongoing discussion for many years in terms of the importance of business model innovation in international business. So, is it actually so that agile companies need to be able to innovate the parts of their business model so that they're able to make the standardization, adaptation decisions for international markets based on the market-specific characteristics, and to revise their business models accordingly? Or is it actually so that those companies, and especially the high-tech startups, which are oftentimes termed as born globals, the companies that look to global or international markets straight from the foundation instead of waiting around for many years and building the domestic business, that those companies actually oftentimes, first of all, they are not that common in terms of the total pool of SMEs, as I mentioned. In many countries, like in Finland, and there's some research in other Nordic countries in the EU, for instance, that confirms that, but also that if you as a company, as an internationally oriented company, are constantly innovating your business models and revising your business models, well, sometimes maybe it's also an indication that you're not getting it right. And there's also some argument that actually Professor Henard, for instance, who's been doing work on international business and especially on rapidly internationalizing companies for many decades, has made the case for accidental internationalists. So rather than actually strategize and develop your business models based on proactive development and formal strategizing, it's actually so that some companies tend to have highly scalable business models where they're operating in niche markets, and therefore it just makes sense for them to take that business model if it works in a different country and then to expand their business there. So this is a much more wide varied discussion in terms of that. But then if we look at that IE, which relies in the intersection between international business, of course, it looks not just at the formal strategizing on international business and multinationals, but also the entrepreneurial side. One aspect that is highlighted is the decision-making logic. The theory of effectuation, which some might have heard of, is one aspect. The other aspect that is close to that is the concept of bricolage. If someone is not familiar with that and how it relates to strategizing, I would give you just a basic example that if you want to build a house, so you have two different ways of doing it. So the traditional international business strategizing aspect would be that, okay, you have some architect show up your house and how it's going to go, and then list of all the things that you need to build that house and all the resources. Then you go out and find those resources and develop your house according to plan. So this is development of your operations based on formal strategizing. But oftentimes what the entrepreneurs are looking at is not that way, but it's actually in a way that, okay, these are the resources I have. I have a pile of bricks here. I have a friend who happens to be a carpenter. I have some aspects that I could use in terms of money or my time to build. So what kind of house would I be able to build with these tools and resources that I have? So this is the international entrepreneurial perspective. And one aspect of strategizing in the international business world is the crisis of delegation, the crisis of decision-making that happens when this entrepreneur-oriented strategizing and decision-making actually has to give way into more formal delegation and more formal pre-planned strategic development, which is categorizes the large multinationals, but also categorizes the different distinct markets in the world. So in some research showing that in some aspects, that some markets, it is actually so that the uncertainty of the institutional environment, so the uncertainty of the environment in terms of politics, in terms of corruption, so on, that should favor, in that kind of environment, people and companies tend to favor more entrepreneurial decision making. Whereas in more stable environments, they are able to strategize in more long-term details. So it actually, international business sense, also matters quite a lot in which areas you're operating. These were covered. Here is one aspect that was I was not part of this research, but that basically looked at during the pandemic and what kind of external shocks, in general, we could say about certain aspects of international strategizing, and this from the entrepreneurial perspective, especially. So, based on the data that this was some hundreds of Finnish companies, my colleagues in Lappeenranta and elsewhere made this study that was published in Small Enterprise Research a couple of years ago. So they actually made it in 2022. It was quite a quick review process in that sense, but found that actually just having the persistence of effort and consistency of goal interest had a huge impact in terms of the internationally oriented companies being able to proceed in the internationalization even during these challenging times that the coronavirus pandemic impacted. So being able to recognize the opportunities, having some slack resources, having cognitive flexibility as an individual, or all were highly impactful in terms of determining how well the companies were actually, these are SMEs especially, were able to actually continue internationalizing their business even with all the issues that the pandemic brought. Another aspect that we did, that was part of that, we looked at the survival strategies of Finnish SMEs during the global crisis. So of course, one aspect that made survivability more clearly was to what extent were the different parts of the value chain digitalized in the company. But what was actually quite interesting from international business perspective is that, as I mentioned, it's the companies that had international operations were able to cope much better and were able to show much more resilience in terms of the strategizing. And there are some quotes that we had in many interviews for DEEP and the survey data. And there it became clear that many of the companies were actually looking at the international markets as different specific markets as strategizing, contextual strategizing tools in a way. So they were basically saying things like, okay, we are operating, for instance, in France and UK and USA, and we are following how the pandemic restrictions and how the different travel restrictions and different kinds of supply chain issues restrictions develop in these different countries. And we are making our decisions on where to invest our time and money based on that. So if everything holds down in UK, then we might proceed with the US market instead. And this is the kind of the strategizing aspect that the domestically oriented companies lacked. And they were actually sometimes quite apathetic in just waiting for what is the government going to do next and what is the European Union going to do next in terms of making some broad decisions that then our local government will be able to initiate and make this formal different restriction based on how the pandemic situation is. So actually just conducting international business was found to be quite an important survival strategies for, especially for smaller companies during this kind of crisis. I think this was the key aspect. So we're not going to go through all the different quotes, but I would show you another model from another paper that was done by some other Finnish scholars from Turku University, where actually they found that business more innovation, being able to innovate proactively your way of value capture, value creation, value proposition was highly impactful on continued international growth of these companies during this kind of external shock and challenging international business situation globally, which the pandemic brought us. So they coined this term SME international resilience, which seems to be highly related to the ability of the smaller companies, especially to actually continue engaging in international growth and international business, regardless of what kind of external shock or challenges that they bring. And of course, the type of shock is very distinct in terms of, for instance, the local challenge that may be to businesses trying to do business in Russia now with the Ukraine war versus the coronavirus pandemic in terms of the restrictions of face-to-face interaction and so on. But still, some aspects we could say that what constitutes actually the concept of resilience and how it relates to international business are some aspects that impact. So if you think about that aspect, so the main takeaways from this short discussion in that perspective say that the organizational resilience in itself is different from your resilience as an individual person, an entrepreneur. But to the extent that you're able to show that whether you are an entrepreneur or a CEO or an export manager of a company, then that can actually impact internationalization also. It's not just the resilience that you have or the culture you have in an organization. And international expansion in itself can also improve the resilience, especially for smaller companies, by providing these different contingency options for external shocks, such as was the case with the pandemic. And how can they improve their resilience, especially the internationalizing SMEs, is by innovating the business models. So it's created a process of business innovation through these different 5 forces that was identified in this study by the Turku scholars. And then finally, the digitalization of value chain activities themselves was linked to resilient international SMEs. So these born digitals, otherwise known as companies who are able to digitalize large part of the value chain very soon after they're being founded. So they may be digital startups, or they may be other type of companies that are actually looking at digitalization as a value prospect for themselves rather than something that they would do reactively based on external shocks and restrictions. It is something that definitely can make them more resilient than other type of internationally operating firms. So these are the main takeaways that we have found, and that in terms of doing empirical research and working with the companies from the Finnish perspective. And I think there's something for us to learn, even though we say that fortunately, at least the pandemic is not so prevalent as it was some years ago, or even maybe 2 years ago. But still, there are some aspects that we say that might be common to external shocks in the global economy to begin with. And they may take different forms, but they give us an opportunity to also look at how is resilience and how is just the fact that you are doing business internationally rather than domestically, how those are able to promote some resilience in your company by default. So that was the first point. The second point would be about the current elephant in the room, the rise of generative AI. So this, of course, has struck businesses and also educational institutes worldwide quite rapidly. We're, of course, also doing some research related to this, but I'm looking at here mostly from the perspective of what could be the main issues or the main challenges from the perspective of internationally operating companies. And again, especially if you are not a large multinational who also has all the resources and the tools to actually integrate the current Gen AI systems and pay for those integration of those within your organization, but rather if you're a resource-constrained SME that has some issues. Just to show, this is something that I found quite interesting. It's not, it's from the past year, so it's not from the last couple of weeks, but this is conducted in December 2023, so about 1 year ago. The views on how AI has impacted workplace productivity by region. So India is number 1 here. Where is Finland? It's nowhere to be seen. And this is something that flummoxes us here in a way, because Finland is a developed Western economy with highly developed digitalized infrastructure, and apparently you should have digital literacy in terms of the population and the entrepreneurial and the company perspective. But actually Finland has been doing quite poorly especially in terms of SMEs and adoption of Gen AI tools. So this is just a frame the discussion in a way that to say that this is a bit of an issue generally. I don't know why that is, but you may have some insight, especially from the India perspective in that. The other aspect would be this is from a study that was done early on Boston Consulting Group consultants. So it seems that generative AI works as a skill level especially, so it enables those people who may not be as skilled linguistically, for instance, for those of us whose English is not the first language and so on. So it's able to actually make more even the skill differences in terms of doing the consulting. So one aspect of that would be, of course, consulting for internationalization strategies. So this might be something that the people involved in growing the business who are not as skilled in terms of international business may be able to take advantage. So here's another aspect that you may take a look at the paper that is linked there if you want to. And of course, the different functions of the AI, this is from McKinsey and Co. study. I picked this in terms of where it's expected to be important. So marketing and sales in terms of the business itself. Now, it's a bit of a stereotype, but I find it quite accurate in the Finnish context. Many of the Finnish companies and SMEs that are interested in international business and are multinationals even doing international business are very engineering oriented, high technological competence, but also very slow on marketing and scales ability. So just the fact that selling your solution that might be technically important. So that has been a challenge for us in many, many decades. So this is an area, of course, where the AI can have is expected to have a big issue. And some other aspect as well, just the software firms in general, but just the sales and marketing that seem to be, especially in terms of internationalization of SMEs, and which are resource constraints, and when they tend to pool their resources oftentimes in the technological R&D rather than the sales and marketing, that's where AI can as a skill level. Used to say this is, I think, something that links to all of the, regardless of if you're a student or an entrepreneur. So just to pay in mind that in general, using AI as a default generator of internationalization strategy is still at this point of the tools is very still likely to go wrong because they tend to miss out the larger societal context in itself. So not just as a student, but if you think in terms of engaging in international business, it can help you brainstorm. But the problem right now still is that you still need to have domain-specific knowledge to validate whether or not the large language models especially are able to produce the kind of actionable insight. One example I would give is that I recently updated my list of publications to ChatGPT and asked it for updates on recommendations on what I should research next. And it just bold-faced suggested that I should book tickets to Russia and go interviewing Russian companies, not knowing that apparently that the border is closed and none of the Finnish people are encouraged to go to Russia. So far, otherwise that they might be caught up in some kind of political games in that perspective. So missing the larger societal context. So I think this is an issue, and this is something that continues to be an issue even with the current tools, is that you should be able to validate and cross-check whether or not the output is accurate. But if, for instance, you're developing something related to marketing or internationalization strategy that needs to be fact-based, then you as a professional need to be able to check that. Now, if you're looking at for like ideas on marketing campaigns and so on, which is more creative rather than facts-based strategizing, then of course, but they're highly useful already. But just to point out in terms of the strategizing aspect. Use cases for international entrepreneurs, international SMEs especially, there are, of course, quite many doing the foreign market research and analysis. I think this picture here summarizes what we have learned in many ways of the challenges of doing international business from the small company perspective. So you have a busy entrepreneur who's busy in running their company and trying to make ends meet, and they are presented with this foreign market knowledge, or this not knowledge, but information in terms of certain markets. So this might be a Finnish person who sees market potentially in India, for instance, and asked some company or some master student group, for instance, to get inside information and knowledge on how they should develop the internationalization strategy. And of course, there's a lot of information to be had, but the issue is not the availability of information oftentimes, but it's the time and especially the absorptive capacity of small firm managers and the entrepreneurs, that then the lack of understanding of where to put their time so that they could actually accumulate that foreign market knowledge to make informed strategic decisions on what to do related to the market entry. So I think in that sense, the picture itself captures it quite well. We have had many cases like this with Finnish companies wanting to internationalize, given very detailed market analysis data on German market, for instance, by German students who understand the culture, they understand the language, and they can go through all kinds of official documentations that only German, hand over all the information to the company and the entrepreneur. And 2 years later, they haven't internationalized because it's a pile of paper that they haven't been able to make sense of personally. I think this is one area, key area, where especially for smaller companies aiming for international markets, is that generative AI can do a lot of good work in terms of condensing topics, in terms of taking something that is being put into there as a large body of knowledge, and then distilling that, writing it in different ways to make sense of you as an individual, regardless of whether you have highly specific knowledge on this topic, for instance, finances or not, in a way that enables your learning process and absorption of that foreign market knowledge much easier. So in this case, I think especially for smaller companies, Gen AI can be already very, very, very helpful. Then I would just show towards the end here. This is a very recent paper that came out Thunderbird International Business Review. So this is from a doctoral student and a professor of international business in Vaasa University in Finland. So just trying to pinpoint what are the specific characteristics of AI that are relevant for international business management. So they came up with three different aspects. So first of all, autonomy. So the generative AI increases the capacity of international business practitioners to act without human intervention and behave without human knowledge in itself. So automating routine tasks and activities that relate to cross-border business management. So aiding in decision-making and managing the global value chains and optimizing international operations. The second aspect would be learning. Instead of providing just general information, also providing learning opportunities for managers in the internationalization process. So this was already outlined in previous studies before the emergence of ChatGPT, but now, of course, has been highly emphasized, trying to deal with ambiguity of human knowledge and engaging in this AI-based learning that can actually then not just replace, but augment and help to be a kind of an sometimes brilliant and sometimes dumb research assistant that can help your personal decision-making in determining, for instance, entry mode selection. What kind of entry mode should we choose in the specific market without having the information necessarily based on years of experience yourself. And then finally, combinative in terms of hybrid interaction between machines and humans. So the combinative characteristics of AI to reconfigure the nature and the structure of these value-creating activities across different countries. So this constitutes, I would say, actually a dynamic capability that relates to AIs that we would expect that would be highly, highly important for international business, anyone engaged in management position in international business going forward. So being able to develop those capabilities to make use of AI tools as not as your replacement, but as something that can help augment your professional decision making when it comes to all the different markets and the complex nature of international business decision making and strategizing that exists. And I would end with the picture. This is just my initial understanding on one example of where an AI-enabled view of internationalization strategies, how it might look like. So, as I mentioned, that attention of the person and the absorptive capacity has been, in many ways, the internationalization slowing aspect that especially the SMEs are struggling with. And this is exactly where the use of generative AI tools can actually help in terms of steering one's attention so that you are able to absorb more foreign market knowledge in more condensed forms, which then increases actually your foreign market knowledge as an individual and as a team and as an organization. And based on that, you're able to make most likely more feasible and more quick decisions related to internationalization, the way that you make decisions as an individual entrepreneur, as a company, or when you should or shouldn't actually innovate your business model. So this, in brief, are some thoughts, and I hope that you find them interesting in terms of your own thinking and practical perspective as well. And now I believe that we have some time, maybe still, for a couple of questions or commentary.
Yes. Fabulous, Professor Rasi, as expected. You have perfectly covered up on the theme that we would want you to address. So with your permission, can I take up some questions from my students?
Yes, please.
Great. So yeah, there's one of the students asking about the ethical considerations. So what are the ethical considerations for entrepreneurs operating in a connected global economy?
So this does not relate directly to AI, does it? So just in general, ethical questions. I think this is a very good question. One aspect is something that, at least here in Finland and Western Europe, we see a lot of the younger generation is really keen on, is the sustainability. And it's the blended value creation, and seeing value creation as an entrepreneur, as a firm, not just through the profit lens, but through the triple bottom line, which is data, looking at more or less also the environmental lens and the social lens from that perspective. One issue that we have, for instance, might relate to healthcare. So, for instance, the discussion, should it be public? This is a discussion that going in Finland. Should it be public? Should it be private? So, but the question would be that would it be somewhere in between, in the sense that captures both good parts of both ways of doing, but not the inefficiency perhaps on the public sector or the highly profit-oriented nature of the private sector. This is what social entrepreneurship might be beneficial. So one aspect of the issue that the ethical decision making is that, to what extent do you want, as an entrepreneur, an international business person, to engage in this blended value creation, and to what extent are you willing then to make some trade-offs if those are necessary? A couple of examples. One example is that we found in our studies of Finnish SMEs, and we've done large-scale surveys, is that we always, of course, wish that by engaging in environmental-related practices would yield profit benefits, but mostly we have not found a direct link to that. So to us, that indicates that perhaps you have to make some decisions, like, do you go for profit maximization or do you go for sustainability? So this is one ethical dilemma. Sometimes, of course, you're able to accrue both, and to the extent that the societies and the regions, for instance, EU is highly regulating this aspect so that it would be more and more feasible, also profitability based for the companies to do that. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, when you look at international business strategizing specifically, to realize that you're going to be faced sometimes with these ethical questions. One example I would give is that let's say that I, as a Finnish business person, want to grow my company and find that there's a potential distributor in Sweden that would double our business within a couple of years, but also that person or that company has been found guilty of some environmental negligence or some unfair practices itself. Now, this is, of course, if I happen to be an environmentally oriented entrepreneur, our company is very much built on the sustainability mindset rather than the profit mindset primarily, then I would be much more disinclined to actually go for that business opportunity abroad. Whereas the traditional SME itself might say that, okay, this is not optimal, but this is the only distributor we have, and this is the way that we can actually grow our business and keep our people employed, and we don't have to go into these cooperation negotiations, which might require us to lay off some people. So, of course, this kind of ethical decision making, that if you truly are an environmentally or socially conscious entrepreneur, especially, then of course you may actually be disinclined to take that. Then the other aspect of that ethical decision making is that many of the environmental challenges, like climate change, are not, of course, constrained within the national borders, but they're global. So an entrepreneur who is developing their company on, for instance, on circular economy ideas, or developing on clean energy ideas, you might say that they might have by default much more global outlook. So you are saying that, okay, it doesn't benefit if I just run my business here in Finland, because Finland is a small place in the world, but I need to be able to make my innovation global. So we can actually get these clean energy solutions worldwide and then have that impact on a global environment, perhaps down the line that I, as an individual person, I'm looking for. So many of these decisions are actually value-based, and this is more of a question that can we actually, is this something we, for instance, in business schools, can we educate, or is this something that you as an individual come up with? So for instance, we talk about education in social entrepreneurship. Can we teach individual person to care more about the elder people so they could start a social entrepreneurship oriented startup that relates to healthcare for elderly people? I don't know about that. So that's something perhaps that you as an individual have to take thought, but just to the understanding that even for larger multinational companies, and especially for those that are consumer oriented, they have to be increasingly cognizant of these facts and that the world is changing. So this mindset can, by being an international entrepreneur, of course, you're able to have much more immediate impact. But even for larger multinational companies, by having this kind of conscious entrepreneurial mindset can be beneficial. And this is actually what many of the larger companies are looking for. So one aspect that I would take is in Finland is Nokia company, who was oftentimes said that they failed or in their mobile business mainly because they failed to hire entrepreneurial people in the organization and to kind of get around the incumbent inertia that the large multinationals tend to have and to retain that flexibility. So of course the large multinationals are to an extent aware of it and extent aware of the changes in the workplace. So as an individual, of course, then the decision making, it's much more clear if you are an international entrepreneur or a startup manager rather than large multinational. But of course, the large multinationals can have a big impact in terms of that development down the line. So it's a bit of a murky issue in that sense. But these are some aspects that I think that ethics in terms of international entrepreneurship and international business decision making today are being played out.
Great. Considering your expertise that lies in the engaging with SMEs, I have one question from the student who says, what are the key challenges SMEs face when expanding internationally, and how can they overcome?
One aspect is, of course, lack of foreign market knowledge. So if you think about the Lappeenranta area, for instance, we're right next to the Russian border, but even before the war, there were very few companies that were actually operating in like St. Petersburg, which is geographically close, but it's a very different way of doing business. So the companies that the entrepreneurs that actually were doing business were mostly Russian immigrants, or they were Finnish persons who had been living and working or got their master's degree, for instance, in St. Petersburg, Russia. So they understand the local community. So the lack of foreign market knowledge is one aspect. Then, of course, as I mentioned, in some ways it may be that the company structure or your personal legacy can impact that. So the disinclinability to take those risks. So companies would be important, would be interesting for venture capitalists and different kinds of external private investors to kind of really scale the operations quickly, may be quite disinclined to actually go for that funding because it would mean diluting their ownership outside from the family. And therefore, they're much more risk averse in terms of okay, let's just try to get bank financing, and then the banks are asking for collateral, and then you need to grow your business in the domestic market to get that collateral before you start. And then if you are operating in a high-tech environment, it may be that the technological novelty of your innovation by the time that you are ready, the international markets might have worn off. Another aspect that is huge, of course, is financing. So especially for an SME that is engaged in any kind of project business. So some SME managers have told me to use this term that the large multinationals, especially, they are using their SMEs as their personal banks. So just giving the kind of financing agreements where the SMEs are very hard pressed to maintain constant cash flow that would be international growth enhancing. And then I would say that in terms of the overall challenges that the SMEs face, that just the fact that they are resource constrained means that you're always thinking about in terms of trade-offs. So for instance, we found in one study of Finnish SMEs and large-scale study that the Finnish SMEs had to make decisions between service innovation and internationalization. So you have to really decide, which is more important to us? Do we actually need to innovate our service for like a strategic perspective for that line, or do we go for launching a project or starting a distributor dealership or developing some kind of joint venture in certain target markets? So they cannot have them both. Just to understand that you need to make trade-offs, and then the importance of really having those entrepreneurial capabilities and being able to perceive the environment in a way that you perceive the international entrepreneurial opportunities accurately and timely way is, of course, essential. So to be aware that, okay, we may have to make decisions, trade-off decisions between innovation and internationalization specifically, whether that is business model innovation or service innovation in itself. So those are some aspects that I find that are highly, highly challenging for SMEs in particular, so that they are that. Finally, I would say that the liability of outsidership so we are oftentimes talking about startups and SMEs as agile and something that really ready to respond, but they also lack oftentimes legitimacy. So if you imagine you working in a large multinational, and some Finnish startup from nowhere comes and says that we have this wonderful new innovation that you should invest 20 million euros or dollars within the next couple of years, there's an issue of legitimacy. So where are you from and who are you exactly? So these are the issues that the smaller companies really need to wrestle with. So there are quite a few. And I think that in those cases, whether or not the expectation in your environment is to scale your business rapidly internationally or not, has a big issue. So if you are a digital startup, or if you are engaging in any kind of internet-based businesses, then you don't really have a choice. You really have to go with the flow in that sense.
Great. Thank you. That's very nicely put on the question that anyways lies on your expertise. I would take the last question considering the timelines. You spoke about digital, connectivity and the role that AI and technology is playing in today's business world. So there's a question: how can entrepreneurs leverage digital connectivity to create a sustainable business model in a globalized economy?
Oh, that's a really big question. I think, um, I mean, one aspect, of course, is that if you think about certain businesses, which businesses are moving towards the digital world, and where it's actually, which are consumer-based, where it's actually consumer-driven, the digitalization process. I think that's something we need to pay attention to. One aspect of that is that I'm still maybe of the generation that used to buy physical CDs and DVDs, and now look at Finland, the younger generation, and almost nobody is buying those, but everything is digitally streamed and different platforms and so on. Another aspect would be that the sustainable business models in themselves, of course, related to digitalization, for some industry sectors or businesses, they are quite easy to thought of, and others are in a way quite challenging. But in general, the digitalization of optimization, I think, is the key question. Optimization of energy resources, optimization of different aspects. For instance, there was just news that there's a new innovation here where I live in that you can buy and put in your house that will actually manage the electricity usage within your house, so that it's good for you, but still beneficial. So you may have heard that Finland is actually one of the largest net emitters in terms of pollution, not pollution, but CO2 in the world, not because we would have a load of coal plants, but simply because it's such a cold country that so much energy goes into heating houses in the wintertime. So in these aspects, it's actually important where they are able to develop the kind of sustainable business model that is sustainable, not just from the environmental perspective, but also give perhaps some optimization benefits for the consumers or the businesses. Another aspect would be that how do you actually enable on a more of a policy level the rise of sustainable products and services. I will give you one quick example. We used to work with the Energy Wave company, that installs, Finnish company installs these kind of energy generating wave energy machines in the bottom of the ocean, so that takes the ocean current strength and puts that in energy. And one aspect that they would be complaining was not that the government doesn't support, or the government and the regional operators, decision makers support like coal-based and other types of fossil fuels, but rather that they are subsidizing solar energy so much that we cannot compete with other clean energy forms. So it's actually quite a messy situation in terms of if you are subsidizing certain type of sustainability in businesses that may be able to companies to develop sustainable business models that are also enable them to engage in business, but also there are some substitutes in terms of that sustainable energy, for instance. So it's a very difficult forest in a way for the political decision maker as well. So, for instance, now that in Finland, solar energy is high simply because it has gained so many public benefits, and now there are other clean energy forms that are much more challenging for companies to really break through in terms of developing business models, simply because the certain type of renewable energy has been receiving so much attention and not the other types. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect would be, I think, a security aspect in as well, in the sense that the different countries may have different aspects in terms of their energy structure and different kinds of sustainability approach. But I think on a global level, international business level, it falls on the decision makers to make the kind of rules that it is beneficial for the companies also to engage in sustainable business model development, so that even if it's not necessarily always profit maximizing, but it is something that is that you can still present to the investors and the shareholders in a way that it's something that is the blended value creation, that is the total value created for profits, societies, and environment. That is in itself maximum. I think that lies in the key of being developed sustainable business models in a way that is conducive also for not just for SMEs and entrepreneurs, but also for larger multinationals.
All right, that's I think yet again a quite detailed deliberations on those questions. I highly appreciate that. Yes, we come to the fag end of the session. I would take this privilege and honor to thank everyone for being a part of this wonderful session. Professor Lassi, if you could stop the screen share, we'll be able to see you in the full screen. Here it is.
There we go.
Yeah. All right. So yes, I mean, as expected, there was a well detailed, oriented discussion on deliberations on a very important topic, I would say. And Professor Lassi was, I would say, the right man in the right job today. That is what we, teach in the HR. Having the right man in the right job is always difficult. And today, I would say the outcome, the objective of this session, was definitely fulfilled by your expertise. So thank you so very much on behalf of the GIBS Business School. On behalf of all the audience out here, I extend my heartfelt thanks to you, sir.
Thank you for inviting me, and hopefully everybody got something out of it that is not directly out of textbooks, in a way that also gains your knowledge outside of the formal classroom environment. And if you are interested in, if you have some questions or comments, feel free to be in touch. As Professor mentioned, I'm in LinkedIn, and also you can send me email, first name, last name @lut.fi. So I'm available for any further discussions or questions that you may have. So thank you for joining.
That's great. 1 second. Yeah. Also, we would be uploading this particular session in our YouTube channel, which would be widely circulated as well to all our aspirant entrepreneurs and our students as well. I would say that to you as well. Yes, I take this moment to thank all the audiences as well who were a part of this wonderful session. Thanks for the patience listening, and thanks for posting those wonderful questions, which I, took it up with the speaker for today. But otherwise, I request all of you to please follow Professor Lassi in LinkedIn. As I said, you get to listen to or read out a lot of information, insights on the entrepreneur journey. And of course, do not forget to like GIBS in all the social media platforms, GIBS Business School and GIBS IRE Talks. So this is Guru Prasad, the host for today evening, signing off. I would thank once again everyone for being a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. And thank you once again, Professor Lassi. Looking forward for many more interaction in the coming days. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.